beginnings, leadership, urgency, and the head. Okay, these are some of the correspondences of Aries. Initiation, of course, relates to the baptism by John. Beginnings, the kingdom of God is already here. That's one of the things about the urgency that is going on, and about the leadership aspect of Jesus' ministry. Kingdom of God is here, so we need to be urgently repenting and getting our stuff together. One of the miracles within the Gospel of Mark is Jesus has a man lowered to him through the roof of a house and cures the paralyzed man. Coming through the roof, argues Reverend Darlinson, is possibly a mention of the head, because you're coming down from the top. So that is part of the evidence that he uses to tie this section of the Gospel to the constellation of Aries. Now, the daytines of Aries, as I mentioned, different constellations that surround it. Cetus the sea monster was cast down by Perseus in the mythology. It's a little constellation that sits off to the side. Perseus the hero is another constellation that's in this section. Cassiopeia, the princess, is also known as the woman on the rock. Okay, that's one of her titles. And all of this mythology goes that Cetus the sea monster was supposed to have Cassiopeia, who was to be sacrificed to him, and Perseus came, killed the sea monster, saved him. That's how the myth goes. Satan is confronted in this section of Mark. There's the temptation in the desert, there's the declaration of the end of the kingdom of Satan, so the monster is slain. Jesus is confronted by the Pharisees at one point, and he refers to himself as the bridegroom, and that is why the disciples can follow him and do things that are different. You know, you do not wait upon the bridegroom, you actually deal with him while he is present with you. And that is a tie-in with Perseus, who is also known as the bridegroom of Cassiopeia in the mythology. So that's where that correspondence is supposed to come in. Peter's mother-in-law. Peter is the rock, and he is specifically called by that name. In the other Gospels, he's called Simon. In this Gospel, he's called Peter, and it is his mother-in-law whom Jesus comes in and heals, the woman of the rock. It's an interesting tie.
Perhaps it's just my lack of background in this, but I'm curious how he links. I can see Satan and basically the monster being linked, but I don't understand the connection between the monster being cast down by, basically slain by Perseus, and how the temptation in the desert around the declaration. I don't see how that actually forms a link. I don't even see them as, well, even in terms of imagery, they don't appear to be similar events.
Well, the correlation I think that he's drawing here is the end of the king of Satan is the defeat of Satan. The destruction of the monster is the defeat of the monster. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the language that he's going with there, is a defeat of a monster.
So it's not correspondence of the outcome of the event as opposed to the specific sections of the event.
Right. Okay. I think that's kind of more it is. It's a very broad correlation, and I mean, I have a section on criticism of this theory a little bit later on, so that's definitely something I wanted to get in. But this is basically the structure of Ivan Darlinson's argument, which is there's a section of mythology that deals with this particular section of the year. He goes through a section of Mark and draws these parallels. One of the most striking is the one of the Aquarius. The figure of Aquarius is towards the end of the cycle. Aquarius is a man carrying a jar of water. At this point in the Gospel of Mark, they send the disciples to go find him an ass to ride on so that he can ride in for Palm Sunday. And when they send him, he says, go and find the man carrying the jar of water. Culturally, men do not carry jars of water. It is very odd in a Semitic culture for men to do that kind of work. So that's why, first of all, it would be a symbol of something that they would see right away. But second of all, it seems to have a higher meaning, a different meaning, especially given its location within the gospel and the specificity of the imagery. So that's another thing that Darlinson ties together with his correspondences. Now, one of my criticisms of this is Scorpio. When he gets to the section on Scorpio, it's very short and it's very weak. The tie-ins are very, very weak for that Scorpio. And his argument for that is that Scorpio is the sign of sexuality, and it is the sign of various darker emotions, especially in the ancient world. So he lists what ancient authors say about the sign, and then he goes to show that those parts were probably excised from the Orthodox version of the Gospel, but the secret Gospel of Mark has portions that would fit in that place that would kind of tie into it. So it's an interesting argument. Again, I don't necessarily know that it's accurate. And I think that's what I had. Yep, blank slide. So, other constellations that I wanted to go through, there's 12 constellations, there's a lot of correspondences, and so it takes a lot of time to go through it. And my purpose here isn't necessarily to go in depth into this subject, but to kind of cover the high points. One of the biggest high points for me was Aries and the idea of the initiation. But the other point that he brings up here is the idea of a zodiacal age, where he starts with this argument is, let's see, the vernal equinox moves very, very slowly through time. It's slowly moving backwards through the signs, okay? And he says that when Moses took the Israelites and the Hebrews out of Egypt, the vernal equinox would have happened in Taurus, just at the very end of Taurus, which would have been the age of the bull. And there's a golden calf in Exodus that is cast down. And we institute the sacrifice of the sheep, the scapegoat, and the ram for the Lord. So that's kind of an interesting parallel there as at the end of that age. At the end of this age, at the end of the age of Aries, we have the baptism of Jesus, which slowly moves into the age of Pisces, Jesus' symbol being the fish. And he thinks that there is actually another layer of zodiacal meaning to the symbols of Judaism and Christianity, and even the more ancient Babylonian religions. So I find that an interesting argument. Now, the fact that zodiacal ages vary by something like an estimate by about 500 years makes me question whether or not it's actually true. But it's a very interesting argument yet once again.
What does that mean for us having passed through Pisces into Aquarius?
Well, what are the correspondences of Aquarius? Aquarius tends to be intellectual, it tends to be reasoning, it tends to be a breaking down of structure, it tends to be a time of formation of new ideas, very much an intellectual time period. Atheism, science, rationalism, breaking down of older mystical and ossified ideas, and an exploration of new ones. It makes a certain amount of sense, but again, the time frame is so long, it's hard to say that there's any firm evidence, because we just aren't far enough into Aquarius to be able to make a true decision on it.
Right, this is the dawning of the age of Aquarius.
What about
It could very well be. Let the sun shine.
I'm curious because I just finished one of Spong's books on Jesus for the non-Christian. And he's talking in terms of the influences on the story of Jesus now, why he's not looking necessarily at the Zodiac specifically. He's talking more in terms of other traditions that has been borrowed from. Now, I'm sort of curious, given that a lot of the influences in Mark and things like that would probably be more of a Judeo, a Hebrew influence. Is there a possibility that these are, strictly symbolic things in terms of, not even necessarily in terms of the Zodiac, but just other references to other traditions and things like that? I know some of them seem a little blatant, especially in terms of the Pisces and stuff like that, and I find myself wondering on that basis. But I'm just looking at it overall at a broader concept, because Spong was very, compelling in what he was saying, that, look, you've got to understand that this is all imagery and stuff like that. It's been borrowed from a multitude of traditions, blah, 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 blah. And he goes, some of these images, while very deliberate, are also sort of more like using common language. So in other words, this is a common image that we use, because he said some writings, religious writings, especially at the time, were expected to correspond to a certain standard. Like, for instance, we see through medieval art, things had to be depicted a certain way. He goes as far as to suggest that within, especially within Mark and all that other stuff, that there is a standard of